My name is Elena Voss, and 8 years ago I stood on my parents' porch with two sleeping babies in the car, asking for nothing more than a couch and 3 weeks of grace. My mother looked at me the way you look at a problem you've already solved in your head. Then she reached over, flicked off the porch light, and closed the door without another word. That click of the latch still echoes in my bones. But tonight, I want to take you back even further, to the Tuesday that truly broke my world open. It was a damp October afternoon in northern Oregon. I was 27, warming bottles in our tiny kitchen while Daniel, my husband of 4 years, was out checking the irrigation lines on our little 5-acre coffee farm. The twins, Liam and Sophie, had just turned 1. They were starting to pull themselves up on furniture and laugh at the silliest things. Life felt fragile but full. The phone rang at 4:17. I still remember the exact minute, because the microwave timer was counting down those last 11 seconds. The voice on the other end was calm in that terrible way emergency calls always are. Daniel had been pinned under the small tractor on a slippery slope. He didn't make it. I drove to the hospital with my hands at 10 and 2, mine completely blank, like someone had pressed pause on my entire existence. When I finally signed the papers, my signature came out steady. That steadiness felt like betrayal. How could my hand be so calm when my heart had just been ripped out? That night, I sat on the cold kitchen floor between 2 cribs and did the math out loud. Rent, truck payment, daycare for 2, diapers, formula, funeral costs. The numbers kept adding up to the same devastating answer: no. I had $327 in the bank and a lease ending in 19 days. I had exactly 2 doors left to knock on. The next morning, I drove 90 minutes east with the twins asleep in their car seats. My parents lived in a neat brick house with seasonal wreaths and perfectly manicured lawns. I'd grown up there, learning that love was something you earned by being useful. My younger brother Marcus got the support for his dreams. I got lectures about responsibility. I knocked with shaking hands. My mother, Diane, opened the door in her cream cardigan and didn't step aside. My father hovered behind her, eyes on his shoes. Marcus cracked his bedroom door, saw it was me, and quietly closed it again. I asked for 3 weeks, just a couch, just enough time to figure out how a 27-year-old widow with twin toddlers was supposed to survive. My mother folded her arms and delivered the words I would carry for the next 8 years. "We can't be your safety net, Elena. You're an adult now. Adults handle their own messes." The twins stirred in the car. The porch light buzzed above us. I said, "Okay," because what else do you say when your own mother looks at you like a bill she never wanted? I carried the car seats back down those steps while she watched from behind the screen door. Halfway to the truck, the light clicked off. Even the house was done with me. I didn't cry until I crossed the county line. If you've ever stood somewhere and realized the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally had already calculated your worth, I see you. I was you that night. But here's what I didn't know as I drove away into the dark with 2 babies who deserved so much more. There was another door waiting. A door that would open without conditions. A door that would teach me the difference between blood and family. And 8 years later, that same porch light would be part of a very different story. One where I finally understood that some people close doors on you not because you're broken, but because they're afraid of what you might become. Stick with me, because this is the story of how I went from being abandoned with nothing to building something so solid that when my family finally came back, they couldn't touch it. And how, on a bright afternoon in front of 300 people, I looked them in the eyes and spoke the quiet truth they'd spent years trying to ignore. I sat in the truck for a long moment after the porch light went dark, watching my breath fog the windshield. The twins were still asleep, wrapped in the thin blankets I'd grabbed in a rush. I remember thinking how small they looked, how innocent. They had no idea their mother had just been told she was too expensive to love. That rejection didn't break me right away. It hollowed me out. There's a special kind of pain that comes when the people who brought you into this world decide you're no longer worth the trouble. I replayed my mother's words the entire drive back toward the city. "We can't be your safety net, Elena." It wasn't said in anger. It was said with calm certainty, like she had already run the numbers and I didn't add up. Later, I would learn the real reason behind that cold calculation. My brother Marcus had just gotten accepted into a prestigious MBA program. My parents had poured every extra dollar into his future, the networking events, the new suits, the apartment near campus. Taking in a widow and 2 infants would have stretched them too thin, they told themselves. They framed it as protecting the family's long-term success. I was the risky investment. Marcus was the safe bet. But in that moment, I didn't know any of that. All I knew was the ache in my chest and the terrifying silence of having nowhere to go. I pulled into a gas station off the highway, killed the engine, and just sat there under the fluorescent lights. The twins started fussing. I fed them what little I had in the cooler and tried not to fall apart. That's when I made the second call, the one that changed everything. I called Daniel's parents, Robert and Margaret Whitaker. I wasn't asking for money or a handout. I just needed to hear a kind voice tell me I wasn't completely alone. Margaret picked up on the second ring. I barely got 3 sentences out before my voice cracked. She listened for maybe 10 seconds, then said the 6 words I'll never forget. "Where are you right now, sweetheart?" I told her the gas station. 40 minutes later, their old pickup pulled in beside mine. Robert got out without a word and started transferring the car seats like it was the most natural thing in the world. Margaret came around with a thick blue knitted blanket she'd made for the twins when they were born. She wrapped Liam first, then Sophie, tucking them in gently under the harsh lights. Then she pressed a warm container into my hands, her famous cinnamon apple oatmeal still hot from the stove. I tried to protest, saying I didn't want to burden them. She placed both hands on my shoulders and looked me straight in the eyes. "Elena, set 2 more plates at the table. You're ours now." No conditions, no lectures about being an adult, just quiet, steady love. I followed their taillights for nearly an hour to their small coffee farm in the hills outside Cedar Hollow, Oregon. 80 acres of misty mornings, old barns, and rows of coffee plants that had seen better days. They gave me Daniel's old room and put the twins across the hall. That first night, I lay awake listening to the creak of the wooden floors and the soft sounds of horses in the distance, wondering how I'd ever repay this kindness. If you've ever been rejected by the people who were supposed to protect you, but then found safety in the most unexpected place, type chosen family in the comments. I need to know I'm not alone in this. That porch rejection from my biological parents became the quiet fuel for everything that came after. Because when blood turns its back, sometimes the universe sends you the real thing. And Margaret and Robert Whitaker didn't just give me a roof, they gave me a foundation. But I was still terrified, still carrying the weight of being told I was someone else's mess to clean up. So I did what scared people often do. I turned that fear into work. And that work would eventually grow into something none of us saw coming. That first week at the Whitaker farm felt like stepping into a different world. The house smelled of fresh bread, old wood, and coffee roasting in small batches. Margaret had turned Daniel's old room into a soft space for me and the twins. She didn't ask questions about what happened on my parents' porch. She simply showed up every morning with warm coffee and asked how I'd slept. Robert, a quiet man with calloused hands and kind eyes, never made me feel like a guest. On the 3rd day, he took me out to the fields at sunrise. The mist hung low over the rows of coffee plants, and the air carried that deep, earthy scent I would come to love. "This land doesn't care about your last name," he told me. "It only cares if you show up and listen." Those words stayed with me longer than any lecture I'd ever received growing up. The twins settled in faster than I did. Margaret would sing old hymns while changing their diapers, and Robert built a little wooden playpen right in the kitchen so they could watch us work. For the first time since Daniel died, I heard them laugh again, real, full-bellied laughs that made something tight in my chest start to loosen. I tried to earn my keep immediately. I woke before dawn, helped with the morning chores, cleaned stalls, and learned how to turn the compost. At night, I'd sit at the worn kitchen table and study everything I could about coffee. I had a degree in agricultural science that I'd earned working nights while Daniel was alive. But book knowledge felt different when you were standing in actual dirt. One evening, after the twins were down, Margaret found me at the kitchen sink staring out the window. I was washing that same chipped blue bowl she'd given me at the gas station. My hands were shaking. She didn't say anything at first, just dried her hands on her apron and stood beside me. "You don't have to prove you belong here, Elena," she said softly. "Love isn't a debt you repay, it's a gift you pass on when you're ready." That moment cracked me open. I cried for the first time in front of her, ugly shoulder-shaking tears. She pulled me into a hug that smelled like cinnamon and safety. In that embrace, I realized how long I'd been carrying the weight of being someone's burden. My own parents had made me feel like an expense. The Whitakers made me feel like family. If you've ever had someone choose you when your own blood, wouldn't you know how healing that feels? It doesn't erase the pain, but it gives you new soil to grow in. Slowly, I started noticing things in the fields that others missed. There was one particular heirloom variety of coffee plant on the back slope, Arabica typica, crossed with something older, more resilient. The beans had this subtle floral note with a bright acidity that reminded me of Oregon rain. Most people saw an average crop. I saw potential. I asked Robert if I could experiment with a small section. He handed me the keys to the old processing shed and said, "It's yours to tend. No contract, no conditions, just trust." Those early months weren't easy. I still woke up some nights reaching for Daniel. I still felt the sting of my mother's porch light turning off. But every morning I walked those rows with the twins in a carrier on my chest, talking to them about soil health and bean density like they could understand every word. The work became my anchor. Margaret started leaving little notes in my room, simple encouragements and written on scraps of paper. Robert taught me how to repair the old roasting machine. Together, the three of us began rebuilding something that felt like hope. I didn't know it then, but that door they opened for me wasn't just a place to stay. It was the beginning of an entirely new life, a life I would eventually build into something extraordinary. And it all started with two people who decided a broken young widow and her twins weren't a problem. They were family. The real healing, though, would come through the work. Through dirty hands and early mornings, and the slow discovery of what I was truly capable of when someone finally believed in me without keeping score. Those first 2 years on the Whitaker farm weren't about glory or big dreams. They were about survival wrapped in quiet determination. I threw myself into the work like it was the only language I still trusted. Every morning before the sun touched the hills, I was out in the fields with Robert, learning the rhythm of the land. Pruning, fertilizing, monitoring moisture levels. At night, after the twins were finally asleep, I'd sit at the old oak desk with stacks of books and notebooks, studying roasting profiles, cupping scores, and market trends until my eyes burned. I was scared most days. Not the dramatic kind of fear you see in movies, but the quiet, heavy kind that sits in your stomach and whispers that you might fail the two little humans depending on you. Some nights I'd stand at the window holding Daniel's old chipped coffee mug, the one with the faded blue handle he used every morning, and just breathe. It still carried the faint scent of him. Those moments hurt, but they also grounded me. Margaret noticed. She never pushed, but she'd leave a plate of warm banana bread or a thermos of herbal tea outside my door. One evening she found me asleep at the desk, head resting on a genetics paper about heirloom coffee varietals. Instead of waking me, she draped that same blue knitted blanket over my shoulders. The one from the gas station. When I stirred, she simply said, "Rest is part of the work too, honey." That blanket became my quiet reminder. Just like the porch light that had been turned off on me, this blanket had been turned on, wrapped around me when I needed it most. If you've ever worked through exhaustion not because you're brave, but because fear is the only thing pushing you forward, I understand you completely. I lived there for a long time. The real turning point came in the third spring. That special heirloom variety on the back slope, the one with the delicate floral notes and surprising resilience, started showing its true potential. I had spent months carefully nurturing it, experimenting with shade cover, soil amendments, and selective harvesting. The first small batch I roasted in the old shed produced something extraordinary. Bright, complex, with a clean finish that lingered like Oregon rain on wildflowers. I entered it blind into a regional cupping competition. We placed second out of 43 entries. That green ribbon wasn't just validation, it was proof. Proof that something others had overlooked could become exceptional with the right care. Buyers started calling. Small at first. Local roasters, then a few specialty cafes in Portland. The money wasn't huge, but it was steady. We fixed the leaking barn roof, we upgraded the roasting equipment. And most importantly, we paid down the farm's mortgage ahead of schedule. I still refused a formal wage from Robert and Margaret for the longest time. It felt wrong. They had taken me in when I had nothing. How could I put a price on that? So I worked harder instead. I built the brand slowly, naming it Whitaker Legacy Coffee. Honoring the family that chose me, I designed simple packaging with hand-drawn labels. I told the story of the farm, of second chances, of a young widow learning to listen to the land. My biological family called twice a year like clockwork, Christmas and my birthday. Short conversations that felt more like obligation than connection. My mother would ask about the kids without using their names. My father stayed mostly silent in the background. Marcus never called at all back then. I didn't tell them much. I kept my world small and protected. Because every time I thought about that dark porch, I made myself a promise. I would never again be in a position where someone else decided my worth. The work became my healing. Dirty hands, aching back, and the satisfaction of watching tiny coffee cherries turn into something people paid premium prices for. Liam and Sophie grew up running between the rows, their laughter mixing with the sound of birds and wind through the leaves. They called Robert Papa Rob and Margaret Nana Maggie. And every single time I heard those names, something deep inside me settled a little more. I didn't know it yet, but those quiet, dark years of building were laying the foundation for everything that would come. A brand, a reputation, and eventually an empire. But more importantly, they were teaching me the lesson my own parents never could. Real love doesn't keep score. It simply shows up, day after day, and believes in you even when you're still becoming. And I was becoming. The calls started changing around year 5. At first it was subtle. Just the usual holiday check-ins that felt more like radar pings than genuine interest. But as Whitaker Legacy Coffee began appearing in specialty magazines and Portland cafes started featuring our single-origin beans, the tone shifted. My mother's voice grew warmer, like honey poured over something sharper underneath. The first real call came on a random Thursday. I was in the roasting shed, sweat on my forehead, adjusting the temperature on a new batch when my phone buzzed. It was Diane. She asked about the twins, by name this time. Liam and Sophie, which caught me off guard because she'd never remembered their names before without prompting. She wanted to know about that little coffee business I was running, how proud she was, how she'd always known I had that quiet strength. I stood there holding a handful of warm beans, listening to her rewrite our history in real time. She spoke about supporting family through tough times, as if the porch light had never gone dark. As if she hadn't calculated my worth and found it lacking when I needed her most. If you've ever had someone rewrite your pain to fit their new narrative, you know how disorienting that feels. It makes you question your own memory. Marcus called next, full of that effortless charm he'd perfected growing up. He'd started a tech consulting firm that was taking off, at least according to him. He laughed easily, asked about the kids, then casually mentioned how family should invest in each other. The word invest lingered a little too long. I let the silence stretch until he filled it himself. He needed a small bridge loan, nothing major, just until his next round of funding. After all, we were blood. I told him I'd think about it. I didn't. Instead, I went back to the fields and worked until my hands ached. Because by then I had started seeing the pattern. Success has a way of making people remember you existed. especially people who once decided you were a bad investment. My father called too, quieter than the others. He spoke about regret in vague terms, how life gets complicated, how he wished things had been different. But when I asked him directly where he stood now, the silence on his end told me everything. He was still standing in my mother's shadow, same as always. Meanwhile, the business kept growing. We expanded from one small online shop to supplying high-end restaurants and subscription boxes across the West Coast. I brought in a small team, young single parents, veterans, people who needed a second chance like I once did. We created a culture where showing up mattered more than where you came from. Margaret and Robert watched it all with quiet pride, never asking for anything in return. But the more visible we became, the more my biological family inserted themselves into the story publicly. Diane started sharing old family photos on social media with captions like, "So proud of my daughter's journey." Marcus liked and commented on every post about the farm. They were building a narrative, brick by careful brick, the supportive family who had always believed in me. I watched it unfold from a distance, saying very little. Because by then I understood something important. People who once closed the door on you don't suddenly deserve a seat at your table just because the lights got brighter. I started documenting everything quietly. Conversations, dates, the shifting warmth in their voices that only appeared when my name showed up in articles. I didn't do it out of anger. I did it for clarity, because I refused to ever again confuse their sudden interest with love. The real test, though, was still coming, and when it arrived, it would come dressed as opportunity, a life-changing offer that forced me to decide exactly who I wanted to build a legacy for. But that's a story for the next chapter. The email arrived by accident, the way uncomfortable truths often do. Marcus had meant to forward me details about a cousin's wedding, but his fingers slipped. The entire thread from years earlier sat there, untrimmed, waiting like a loaded gun. I almost deleted it. Something in the subject line caught my eye, my own name. Against my better judgment, I scrolled. What I read hollowed me out in a way the porch rejection never had. It was a conversation between my mother, father, and Marcus from just weeks after Daniel died. My mother had written the first message. Taking Elena and the twins in would be throwing good money after bad. She chose that struggling farmer. Some decisions have consequences. My father agreed, adding they needed to focus on Marcus's future, his college applications, his opportunities. Then came the line that changed how I saw everything. Diane wrote, "We'll keep the door cracked, just in case that little farm of hers ever amounts to something. No need to burn bridges completely." They hadn't forgotten me out of carelessness. They had deliberately set me aside like an asset with uncertain returns, something to revisit only if it appreciated in value. I was never their daughter in that moment. I was a risk assessment. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the screen until the words blurred. The twins were playing outside with Robert, their laughter floating through the open window. For a long time I waited for the explosion of anger. It never came. What arrived instead was something colder, sharper, and far more useful: clarity. This wasn't new pain, this was confirmation of what I had always sensed. Love with conditions isn't love, it's a transaction with flexible terms. And my family had been keeping their own ledger the entire time. If you've ever discovered that the people who were supposed to love you had already priced you out years ago, breathe with me for a second. That moment hurts like hell, but it can also set you free. I printed the email, not for lawyers or revenge. I printed it so I would never again gaslight myself into believing their sudden warmth was real. I folded the pages and tucked them into the back of my journal. Then I made a decision that would shape the next several years of my life. I would not confront them. I would not scream or cry or demand explanations. I would not give them the satisfaction of knowing how deeply their words still cut. Instead, I would outbuild them. Quietly, thoroughly, irrevocably. That same week, I started meeting with a sharp estate attorney named Patricia in Portland. We began structuring everything with surgical precision. I learned about irrevocable trusts, charitable foundations, and airtight ownership agreements. Every conversation with Pat was calm and focused. I asked questions until I understood every clause. I wanted no gray areas, no loopholes that family could later exploit. Meanwhile, the business continued growing. We launched our flagship subscription box. We partnered with a few Michelin-starred restaurants. Whitaker Legacy Coffee started winning national awards. The more visible we became, the more my biological family turned up the charm. Diane began sending care packages with notes about how proud a mother feels. Marcus posted photos of himself supporting local businesses and tagged our farm. I smiled politely in public when necessary, but in private I kept building the wall, brick by legal brick. Robert and Margaret never asked for details. They simply watched me work with that steady faith that had saved me years earlier. Margaret would sometimes squeeze my shoulder and say, "You don't have to carry it all alone anymore." I never told them about the email. Some truths are too heavy to share even with the people who deserve to know. That hidden email became my silent compass. Every time doubt crept in, I remembered those words, "Keep the door cracked." And every time I reinforced my own door with stronger hinges, ones only I controlled. I stopped being the girl waiting for approval. I became the woman deciding what legacy actually meant, and I decided it would never again be built on conditional love. The biggest test was still ahead, a financial opportunity so large it would force every hidden motive into the light. But by then, I was ready. My foundation was set. My decisions were made. And when the time came, I would speak my truth, not with rage, but with the calm certainty of someone who had finally stopped asking for a seat at tables that never wanted her. The years after discovering that email became some of the most focused years of my life. I didn't talk about it. I didn't post cryptic messages or seek validation. I simply started building with a new kind of intention. Every decision now carried the weight of protection, not just for myself, but for Liam, Sophie, and the Whitakers, who had become my true home. I met with Patricia every month for nearly 2 years. We sat in her quiet Portland office, going over documents line by line. I wanted to understand everything: how irrevocable trusts worked, how to structure a charitable foundation that couldn't be challenged, how to separate the land, the brand, and the intellectual property so cleanly that no future claim could touch what mattered. Pat would sometimes look at me over her glasses and say, "Most people in your position don't think this far ahead." I'd smile and reply, "I've had practice learning what happens when you don't." While the legal walls went up in silence, the business kept standing in the light. We opened our first flagship tasting room on the farm. People drove hours to sit on the porch overlooking the fields, drinking our signature floral Arabica blend. We hired more single parents, offering flexible hours and on-site childcare. The team felt like an extension of the family that had saved me. Margaret baked for everyone on Fridays. Robert taught the younger workers how to read the soil like an old friend. My biological family's efforts grew bolder. Diane started showing up at local events, introducing herself as Elena's mother with that practiced warm smile. Marcus posted videos of himself helping during harvest season, carefully angled shots that never showed how little he actually did. They were crafting their story for the day the payoff came. I let them, because while they built an image, I was building a fortress. One quiet evening, I walked the back fields with Robert. The twins, now 8 years old, ran ahead chasing fireflies. I told him I was working on some long-term plans for the farm. He nodded, hands in his pockets, and simply said, "Whatever you decide, we trust you. No questions about money. No hints of expectation." That kind of trust still undid me sometimes. If you've ever had to protect your peace while others tried to rewrite your story, you understand why silence can be its own powerful strategy. I wasn't hiding. I was preparing. By year 7, Whitaker Legacy Coffee had become a recognized name in the specialty coffee world. We had international buyers interested. Major publications ran features on our regenerative farming methods and our story of second chances. The numbers were getting serious. That's when the corporate inquiries started arriving, private equity groups and large beverage companies circling what we had built. I listened to every offer carefully but said no to them all. I wasn't ready to sell, not until the legal structures were completely locked in. Patricia and I finalized the last documents just weeks before the biggest offer came through, an irrevocable trust for the twins that no one could touch. A generous lifetime provision for Robert and Margaret, including full ownership of the original 80 acres. And most importantly, the Elena Voss Foundation, dedicated to supporting single parents pursuing careers in agriculture and small business. Every clause written with the porch rejection in mind. I kept one small thing for myself too, a few acres and the right to continue small batch breeding of our heirloom coffee variety. A living piece of the legacy I could pass to my children without strings. None of this I shared with my biological family. I answered their calls politely, never revealing how close we were to a massive shift. Their warmth increased with every headline. Diane sent flowers when we won another award. Marcus talked about family pride like he had been part of every early morning shift. I held my peace. Because I had learned the hard way that the people who count you out early don't get to celebrate with you later unless they've earned it, and they hadn't. Everything was in place. The foundation was cured. The doors were reinforced with steel instead of hope. All that remained was the final chapter, the day a $120 million offer would force every hidden truth into the sunlight. And when that day came, I would be ready to speak calmly, clearly, and completely. The offer came on a clear Tuesday morning in early spring. I was standing on the porch watching Liam and Sophie chase each other between the coffee rows when my phone rang. Patricia's name lit up the screen. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the weight behind it. Elena, they came back with their best number, $120 million. For the brand, the processing facility, the intellectual property on our heirloom varietals, and the majority of the land. They want to close in 90 days. I sat down slowly on the wooden steps, the phone pressed to my ear. $120 million. The number felt too big for this quiet farm, where I had once arrived with nothing but 2 babies and a broken heart. For a moment, I just breathed in the scent of blooming coffee flowers and let the reality settle. The buyers were a respected international beverage group, known for preserving the soul of the farms they acquired. They loved our story, our regenerative methods, and the consistent quality of our beans, but they were very clear, this was a full acquisition. They wanted the legacy. I asked for 3 weeks to think about it. They gave me 4. That night, after the twins were asleep, I walked the fields with Margaret and Robert. The moon was bright, casting silver light across the rows I had tended for 8 years. I told them everything. The offer, what it could mean, how I had already structured the next steps with Patricia long before this number appeared. Margaret reached over and took my hand. Her voice was thick with emotion. "You don't owe us anything, sweetheart. You've already given us more than we ever dreamed." Robert nodded, eyes shining. "This farm saved you, but you saved it right back. Whatever you choose, we stand with you." Their words meant everything, because unlike my biological family, they had never kept a ledger. They had simply loved me when I was at my lowest. If you've ever reached a moment where success finally knocks, but you realize the real treasure was never the money, you know how grounding that feels. Over the next weeks, I made the hardest decisions of my life. I sat with Patricia for long hours, finalizing every detail. The irrevocable trust for Liam and Sophie, locked so tightly that no future charm, offensive, or lawsuit could ever touch it. Full deed transfer of the original 80 acres back to Robert and Margaret, plus a substantial fund to ensure they never worried again. And the Elena Voss Foundation, fully capitalized with a mission to support single parents building lives in agriculture and small business. I kept one precious piece for myself and the children, 5 acres and the exclusive rights to continue our private heirloom coffee breeding program, small, personal, and completely ours. A living bridge between the past and whatever came next. I knew what I was doing. I was closing every possible door my biological family might try to walk through later. Not out of cruelty, but out of hard-earned wisdom. I had spent too many years wondering if I was enough. I would not let my children ever feel that way. The sale would be announced at a special celebration on the farm. 300 invited guests, our team, longtime customers, neighboring farmers, industry partners, and of course, the people who had carried me when I couldn't walk alone. Robert and Margaret would be honored as guests of honor. I did not invite my biological family. I thought that decision was clear, but some people have never understood the meaning of a closed gate. As the date approached, the excitement on the farm grew. Tents went up near the tasting room. Flowers bloomed. The twins practiced their little speeches about what the farm meant to them. Everything felt aligned. But 2 days before the event, my mother's car appeared in the driveway. And that visit told me everything I needed to know about what was coming. The morning of the celebration dawned gold, and still, like the farm itself, was holding its breath. By 10 o'clock, the driveway was lined with trucks, trailers, and sleek black SUVs from the buying company. Nearly 300 people moved across the grounds, farmers in clean boots, baristas who had become friends, team members with their families, and industry partners who had watched us grow from a struggling 80 acres to something remarkable. Laughter mixed with the rich smell of fresh coffee brewing under the big white tent. I wore a simple white linen shirt and my favorite worn boots, the ones that had walked every row of this land. Liam and Sophie, now 9, looked so grown up in their new clothes, running around with excitement. Robert wore a tie he clearly hated, tugging at it every few minutes, while Margaret beamed quietly beside him in the front row. This day was for them, for us. For the chosen family that had rebuilt my life. I had not invited my biological family, not out of spite, but because this celebration belonged to the people who had shown up when it mattered. I thought that boundary was clear. I was wrong. I was halfway through greeting guests near the tasting room when I saw them. My mother Diane, father and Marcus, walking through the front gate like they belonged there, dressed in their best clothes, smiles already fixed for the cameras, uninvited, unannounced. Moving through my people like they were part of the story. Diane wore her signature cream coat, the one she always brought out for important occasions. She stopped to introduce herself to strangers as Elena's mother, touching arms and sharing practiced lines about how proud the family was. Marcus positioned himself near the small group of journalists and the live stream camera, casually dropping comments about family sacrifices and believing in her dream from the very beginning. My father trailed slightly behind, hands in his pockets, eyes avoiding mine. My stomach tightened, but I kept my face calm. I had prepared for this possibility, not because I wanted drama, but because I knew who they were. If you've ever had family show up to claim space they never earned, you know that particular mix of exhaustion and resolve. I caught Margaret's eye across the crowd. She gave me a small, steady nod, the same look she gave me that night at the gas station 8 years ago. Robert placed a protective hand on Sophie's shoulder. They understood without me saying a word. The program was set to begin in 20 minutes. I stepped away from the crowd for a moment and stood near the old oak tree, where Daniel and I had once dreamed small dreams. My hands were steady, but my heart was loud. This was it, the moment I had quietly prepared for since reading that email years ago. I walked back toward the wooden stage that had been built near the tasting room. The banner for the Elena Voss Foundation waited to be unfurled behind me. The deed transfer documents for Robert and Margaret were already recorded at the county office. The trusts were funded and locked. Everything important had already been given away, legally, cleanly, and permanently. My mother spotted me and lifted her hand in that proprietary little wave, the one that said she assumed her seat was waiting. Marcus leaned toward a reporter, speaking just loud enough for people nearby to hear about how the whole family stood behind Elena through the hard years. I climbed the 2 steps onto the stage and looked out at the sunlit crowd. 300 faces turned toward me. In the front row, the people I loved waited with open hearts. On the right side, 3 faces watched with carefully constructed expectation. I set my notes down. I didn't need them. The words I was about to speak had lived in my bones for years. This wasn't going to be loud or angry. That was never the plan. The plan was calm. The plan was truth, spoken clearly in front of everyone who mattered. I took one slow breath, looked at Robert and Margaret, and began. I stood on the small wooden stage with the warm Oregon sun on my face and looked out at 300 people who had come to celebrate something real. The microphone felt light in my hand. My heart was steady. This moment had been 8 years in the making, and I was ready to speak it calmly. "Thank you all for being here today," I began, my voice carrying clearly across the tent. 8 years ago, I arrived at this farm with 2 babies and almost nothing. I had lost my husband. And the people I thought were supposed to catch me chose not to. But Robert and Margaret Whitaker opened their door and their hearts without hesitation. They set 2 more plates at the table and said, "You're ours now." That simple act saved my life. I looked directly at Margaret and Robert in the front row. Liam and Sophie sat beside them, eyes wide with pride. This farm, this brand, everything we built together started because of their love. Today, before we make anything official with our new partners, I want to give 2 gifts in front of all of you, because the right people deserve to be thanked out loud. The crowd grew quiet, leaning in. "First," I said, nodding toward the back of the stage. A large banner slowly unfurled behind me. The Elena Voss Foundation, fully funded today with $10 million to support single parents who want to build careers in agriculture and small business. No one should ever have to choose between feeding their children and chasing a dream.
This foundation
Exists because someone once told me I was a bad investment. I want to be the right door for someone else. A warm wave of applause rolled through the crowd. Many people wiped their eyes. I waited for it to settle, then continued. "The second gift is more personal. Robert and Margaret, would you please stand?" They rose, looking confused but smiling. Margaret had her hand pressed to her chest. 8 years ago, you gave me and my children a home when we had nowhere else to go. Today, the original 80 acres, the farmhouse, and everything on it now belong fully to you, free and clear. The deed was recorded this week. Along with that, there is a fund in place so you never have to worry again. You didn't just save me, you showed me what family really means." The applause exploded. People stood up. Margaret started crying. Robert wrapped his arm around her as the crowd cheered. In that moment, everything felt right. But not everyone was cheering. I looked toward the side of the crowd where my biological family stood. My mother's practiced smile had frozen on her face. Marcus had gone pale. My father stared at the ground. I kept my voice calm and clear, loud enough for every person there to hear. Family isn't who shares your blood, it's who showed up. It's who stayed when it was hard. It's who loved you without keeping score. The silence that followed was heavy. My mother found her voice first. It cracked through the quiet like a whip. "How dare you," she said loudly, stepping forward. "How dare you humiliate your own family in front of all these people after everything we've done for you?" Her voice grew sharper, carrying across the tent. "After everything I sacrificed, you're going to stand there and pretend we weren't there for you?" Marcus tried to jump in, his charm gone, replaced by entitlement. "This isn't right, Elena. We're blood. We deserve to be part of this. Family helps family." I stood quietly on the stage, letting their words hang in the air. The contrast was perfect, the calm woman who had built everything, and the loud ones who had only shown up when there was something to claim. 2 of the buyer's staff moved gently but firmly toward them with professional politeness. My mother kept talking as they guided her and Marcus toward the gate, her voice getting smaller with distance. My father didn't say a word. He just looked at me one last time with something like regret in his eyes, then followed them out. The gate closed. The grounds grew quiet again, then the applause returned, this time deeper, more personal. It wasn't just for the money or the sale, it was for the truth spoken out loud. I stepped off the stage and walked straight to Margaret and Robert. We held each other under that blue knitted blanket someone had brought from the house. Liam and Sophie ran into our arms. In that circle, surrounded by the smell of coffee and fresh earth, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. completely free. The celebration continued after they left, because real joy doesn't pause for people who only show up for the spotlight. Music played again. Coffee was poured. Stories were shared under the tent. But I slipped away for a few quiet minutes and sat on the old porch swing where Margaret had once wrapped me in that blue knitted blanket on my first night here. Margaret found me there. She sat beside me without saying a word at first, then pulled the faded blanket across both our laps. Liam and Sophie came running over, breathless and full of questions, piling onto the swing until we were all tangled together under that soft, worn fabric. The same blanket that had held my babies in a gas station parking lot now held all of us, whole, safe, and deeply loved. In that moment, I understood something I wish I could tell my younger self, standing on that dark porch 8 years ago. The pain of being abandoned doesn't disappear, but it stops defining you when you finally choose who gets to write the next chapters. If you've ever had to draw hard boundaries with family, especially the ones who were supposed to love you unconditionally, I want you to know this. It's not cruel. It's honest. It's necessary. And on the other side of that choice, there is peace you can't imagine until you live it. My biological family tried, of course. Lawyers sent letters full of words like reasonable expectations and familial contributions. Patricia read them once, set them down, and said simply, "These have all the legal weight of a whoosh. Nothing could be contested. The trusts were irrevocable. The deeds were recorded." The foundation was already doing its work. Marcus's business eventually folded. Diane sent one final message months later saying she would never forgive me. I didn't reply. Some doors, once closed with intention, stay closed for good. Robert and Margaret still live in the farmhouse on their 80 acres. They finally took a real vacation to the coast last year, the first in decades. Margaret still bakes on Fridays for the team. Robert still walks the fields every morning, now as full owner, not caretaker. I kept 5 acres down the road, small enough to feel intimate, big enough to keep the dream alive. I still breed our heirloom coffee variety by hand, slowly and carefully, teaching Liam and Sophie how to listen to the land the way Robert taught me. They call it our forever patch. Sophie wants to run the foundation one day. Liam wants to be a soil scientist, and every night we eat dinner at a table with no hidden ledgers and no empty seats. That ordinary, quiet life, stew simmering on the stove, homework on the table, laughter echoing through the house, is the richest thing I own. It cost me $120 million to learn. It was free all along. So here's what I want you to take from my story. Love that keeps score was never love. It was just an invoice waiting to be sent. Real family is whoever shows up when the lights go out and stays long after the cameras stop rolling. If someone chose you when your own blood wouldn't, go tell them today. Don't wait for a big moment. And if this story touched something deep in you, drop a comment and tell me, who opened the door for you when others closed it? Type Cosin family if you believe in the family we find, not just the one we're born into. Thank you for sitting with me through all of this. I hope my story reminds you that even after the hardest rejections, you can still build something beautiful, and you can do it with calm, steady hands. This is Elena Voss, signing off with a full heart and an open door for those who need it.